What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Seth, and we are back again with some more Trove to Trove. And today is a day of days because we're going to be talking about crystal gear. We're going to talk about how you obtain it, how it's going to impact the game in a very, very big way, and then the good and the bad of it and just all of that good stuff, right? Now, I want to give a heads up and just say sorry that this video is so late. I had to sleep in. I've been kind of a little bit sick, so my videos might end up coming out a little bit late during the next couple of days. But without further ado, we have a confirmation that you're going to be able to not get crystal gear as a drop from enemies. So Magic Find is just thrown out the window for crystal gear because you're going to end up getting crystal gear from a merchant for 10 flux. I'm not joking. Everybody always thinks like, what? Even I was like a little bit flabbergasted about the whole thing. But the devs confirmed when they were doing their live stream that that was not a placeholder price, that the crystal gear in fact was going to be worth 10 flux each because they want other players to have access to it. Now we'll talk about the ramifications of this a little bit later, but you're going to be able to buy the gear as soon as U8. So basically the way that it's going to work is when U10 ends up coming out later this year, they've only confirmed winter as the release date. There's no release date yet, so stop asking. But we are going to end up getting the Trovian Atlas in our hotbar, so we're going to be able to have access to it right down here and just use this at any point. And then for U8, it's going to start right here with the geode area, and then U9 and U10. Oddly enough, crystal gear is not an exclusive to U10, so we're not exactly sure what's exclusive to U10 because even 5-star dungeons started showing up as early as U8. Now, that means that as soon as you get 5k PR, you're going to be able to jump right up to crystal gear, and they've confirmed like crystal gear at level 1 is pretty much the same stats as stellar gear. And we have no confirmation whether or not stellar souls are going to be involved in the upgrading process of the crystal gear. And until then, I'd say that stellar gear and even radiant gear are pretty much useless. Now, you can loot collect stellar gear when the update comes out to end up getting the pearls of wisdom out of it, and you are going to want to use those on your crystal gear because what separates crystal gear from stellar? Well, if you end up putting pearls on it, it's going to end up having a 5th stat. Now, again, we'll talk about that a little bit later because I want to kind of make a little bit of a point here. If we go over to the club merchant, for some strange reason, if you buy gear off of this guy for Adventurine, it's like it's under different code than gear that drops out in the world. It's going to be random stats, but to the point where even the first stat is going to be completely random. So for example, on a face that you find out in the world, any face item is always going to have max health as the first stat. However, if you buy it from the merchant, the first stat can be any stat that is related to the third stat. So just for example, the first stat can only end up having the same random table of stat values that the third stat has, while the second stat can only have the same stat values of the fourth stat. So for example, you can't get crit damage, as you see right here. You can't get crit damage on the first or third stat, only the second and fourth stat, okay? Hopefully that made sense, because crystal gear is going to be affected the same way. So essentially you can get attack speed on your third set or crit hit on your third slot. You're going to be able to get that on the first slot of gear. So it is going to end up kind of changing a bit of the game in terms of the gear slots that we're going for, because you can only randomize the third and fourth stat, obviously. So that's what's so important about it. Now, I said earlier that we were going to talk about the ramifications of crystal gear. There is good and bad aspects of this. Obviously, the bad right off the hop is that it makes most of the gear in the game absolutely pointless. Makes most endgame players, the feedback that I've got off of them is frustration, because it means that pretty much everything that we've done up to this point has been absolutely useless. Like all those stellar items and forging them up and everything. Like stellar was more expensive than it is now back in the day. It was very difficult to get. Not only that, but it had time gated resource involved with it, and it's kind of been dissipated a little bit over time. But overall, yes, it's kind of frustrating that this new gear is coming out to just say you know what? Screw you. Now, the good aspects of it is that it's not affected by Magic Find, which means that, I don't know if this is intentional on the devs' part, but it means that this is probably going to be the most accessible Trove update they've ever put out. Because, and this is why I don't think that they did this on purpose, since Crystal Gear isn't affected by Magic Find, and pretty much the only thing that's actually affected by Magic Find in this entire game is loot drops for gear. None of the other items like Chaos Chests and junk like that, that's all just completely random. It's not really affected by Magic Find, it's just gear. And for the longest time, people are always asking me during my streams, like, you know, what Magic Find do I have to have in order to end up getting this stellar gear or radiant drops and stuff like that? It's always the big crutch of the game where people get stuck trying to get up to stellar gear and onward beyond that, you know? So let me get out of here. This guy's distracting me and standing inside me because I don't know why you guys stand inside me instead of beside me. Like, seriously, what's wrong with you? So why this is going to be good for the majority of players is because it avoids Magic Find, meaning that dragons essentially become useless with this update outside of vanity, because you don't need the Magic Find, right? So now suddenly you're going to be able to just start forging whatever dragons you want for power rank and also for the stat values that they end up actually giving to your character, right? But you don't need that Magic Find, which I think is really cool because it means that the game immediately when U10 comes out becomes extremely accessible, because suddenly dragons become useless, so you don't need to, you know, grind dragon coins for 1,000,000 years if you don't want to. Obviously the extra stats are going to end up helping you out in U10 and stuff like that for sure, but even then, the way that 5-star dungeons are designed is they're designed in such a way where it's very difficult for a single player to end up completing them because they have like the objectives spread across the dungeon all over the place, right? And I'm not going to get into 5-star dungeons today, but my point being is that with that, it means that your own personal stat values are less important as well. So it means that when Crystal Gear ends up coming out, guys, like, you're pretty much going to be able to fly to the end game. It's ironic that this whole U10 update was talked about throughout the entire year as being the end game of Trove, when coincidentally it ends up, or incidentally, I mean, it ends up making everybody have access to the end game, you know, and ironically doesn't really seem to have that much going for it in terms of like an end game player like myself. I'm excited about the Crystal Gear, don't get me wrong, but it is still kind of like, come on, give me something to do. Now, 5-star dungeons, they have confirmed, is going to end up having different reward tables than most dungeons, which I'm assuming is going to be related to leveling Crystal Gear, because apparently the big reason why Crystal Gear is going to be as cheap as it is because forging it, you're just going to forge it at a normal forge. It's nothing special, despite the fact that I said it was special back in the beginning of the year. It's going to end up costing, apparently, like, crazy new resources that are exclusive to the geode. I'm really hoping that it costs Stellar Souls, because we need a Stellar Soul sync, like, seriously. And further than that, what I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, is that the special reward from completing 5-star dungeons will end up being a requirement for later tiers in the crystal. And with that, I'm hoping that it means that there's not going to be any time-gated garbage around the resources. You know, like, I'm hoping that it's just, oh, you can grind 5-star dungeons till Kingdom Come and also get all of the resources required in order to level up your Crystal Gear, which means that essentially that would end up being kind of the end game. It's pretty much, it doesn't really add anything in terms of end game outside of, okay, so now instead of farming for Stellar Gear and gems, now you're just farming new resources for the sake of getting Crystal Gear on all of your characters, right? So that could still end up being something fun and cool, because more grinding is not a bad thing. You know, I will say before we end up talking about that 5th inventory stat, that the devs did confirm that eventually we will more than likely see crystal tiered gems. People are always asking, I know there's going to be people in the comments of this video asking as well. Right now, when the new update comes out, there's going to be a new 3 set of gems. These are going to be a new gem type, not a new gem tier. So all of our stellar gems are still going to be useful when the U10 update comes out, but unfortunately they did say that it's not a guarantee that they won't have crystal tier gems in the future, and the fact that they're even adding crystal gear and a new set of gems tells me with 100% certainty that when they run out of ideas, this is what they do. They're just going to bump our power up with more items that are going to end up requiring us grinding other areas. Not to mention in the game's code, despite the fact that U10 is going to be the update coming in the winter, the game's code itself originally had plans for U11 and U12. So we'll probably see those in the future as well. Now, for that 5th stat, we can confirm how it works. A couple of them anyways. There is going to be an armor stat that you're going to be able to get on your crystal gear. Absolutely awesome. We've needed an armor stat for a million years. And then the armor penetration stat has actually, Trove, they always gotta name things really weird, right? It's called armor puncture in Trove. Now, the way that stat works is exactly like we ended up guesstimating months back when they ended up talking about the stat value, where the geode surface enemies are going to pretty much operate the same as Ultra Shadow Tower. We kind of knew this, I kind of had a suspicion that the game was going to work like this, because all they can do from this point is kind of take things that are already pre-existing in Trove's code and kind of rearrange it and then try to deliver it as a new product, right? This is a very unfortunate limitation of not only the game engine, but I think also the developer's imagination, or whoever's in charge of all of this stuff, right? That said, I'm not complaining about this stuff. I do think it's still cool. So basically, when you go to Ultra Towers, if you're a new player, you end up getting your stats nerfed. So the enemies themselves end up taking less damage from your overall abilities. This is what's going to end up happening with the geode enemies, is they're going to end up taking less damage from your attacks. And then if you have armor puncture, basically what that's going to do is kind of negate that defense of theirs. So let's just say it works in percentage value. If you have 10% armor puncture, that means that it's going to have 10% of your normal damage getting through to the enemy, as opposed to if you have 100% armor puncture, which it doesn't work on a percentage value, I'm just making a point, then you would end up doing 100% of the damage. And then the armor stat, obviously, we kind of saw this coming. The armor stat is going to work the exact same way, but towards the character. So that's where, like I said, we're seeing the exact same thing that's already existing in the game's code, but now just moved into a different direction. However, this does have a lot of really positive impacts on the game. But right now they did confirm that armor puncture, the armor stat, and all the other stats that they haven't talked about, these will only be exclusive to the geode surface area. Eventually, they'll end up working it out so that it works out with the main game, but unfortunately the update itself is not going to see that coming, and we'll see if it ever does end up coming to the rest of the game. We do know that they're going to be upgrading the Shadow Towers in 2019, so I'm assuming that when they overhaul the Shadow Towers, they're going to make it work with the new stat values, meaning that Shadow Towers are probably going to end up seeing a big buff. We do know that there is also going to be another geode surface update coming out in 2019, early 2019, that's going to be introducing new Titan bosses and stuff like that. And then the geode surface itself is going to end up having their own rampage bosses that apparently are on a half-hour timer, so pretty cool in that regard. Now, anyways, that pretty much covers everything about crystal gear though, folks. So all of that other stuff we're gonna have to save for another time. Either way, to summarize, this is going to change Trove in a very big way. Personally, I think it's a good thing, because like I said, I don't think they did this on purpose, because with crystal gear, it makes Magic Find utterly useless, and thus it makes the grind of the entire game very, very minuscule. Like, you don't need to go for dragons anymore. They're just for extra stats as well as just vanity, and with that, that's great, Now, that said, the reason why I don't think that they did this on purpose is because obviously that's going to take sales away from the potential of greater dragon caches. They become useless, and then on top of it, this is kind of their bad solution to Magic Find being a problem. Because the devs are aware of that. I will say that they know that Magic Find is a problem in this game, because Magic Find is the one value of the game that separates endgame players from starting players. But it's more than that. It's more than endgame players and starting players. It's more like players that have been playing this game for a long period of time compared to people that are either at the beginning of the game or spend money, which is kind of how Trine Worlds designs their games. They want to have a huge paywall in the way, or it's going to take a million years to end up grinding stuff. But the fact that they've changed it in this regard, this is kind of their solution to that magic find. And what I mean when I say I don't think they did it on purpose, I mean I don't think they realize the ramifications of how many mechanics of Trove they make useless and moot when Crystal Gear is going to end up coming out. That said, it's going to be great for new starting players, and hopefully for free-to-play players, it means that the new resources that are required to upgrade Crystal Gear should retain their value the months into the update, instead of something like Plasmium where it just became super duper cheap. I mean, obviously it's going to be really expensive to sell these resources day one, so I can kind of recommend you doing that. But yeah. Oh, and one last thing that I did want to talk about today, I mean, I have a separate video talking about this, but I do think it's important, so I want to grab your attention now because I know a lot of people are going to be watching this Crystal Gear video. Is the devs did confirm, they did a 180. Okay, they confirmed that empowered gem boxes and shadow gem boxes that are in the game right now will in fact drop the new gems. So don't open your empowered gem boxes, don't open your shadow gem boxes. Unfortunately, the devs did say the exact opposite statement, and now they have just completely changed this. So it means when I opened all my empowered gem boxes, I mean, rip, I just have no chance. Like, I've still got enough empowered gem boxes now because I'm saving them up, but I just wanted to get that point out there. Save your emp boxes, save your shadow gem boxes. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like, sub, hit that notification bell, and if you want to support me, you can always sponsor the YouTube channel by hitting that join button down below, buying some of the merch, which is in the description, or if you don't have any money, check out the link to Gawkbox. It's a fancy way that you can end up donating to me for absolutely free, and it only takes like 2-3 minutes of your time. Sign orange, stay up, everybody.